Hi dear audience, today we discuss the rewriting of self and Muslim identity in the backdrop of the post 9/11 cultural trauma in Naqvi's Homeboy. Naqvi is a Pakistani fiction writer and the novel Homeboy was written in 2009. Basically, it's the story of a Muslim man in New York in America. His name was Chuck and his three friends who are AC, means Ali Chaudhry and Muhammad Shah and one other. They have been living in America since some years before the incident of 9/11, means 3 to 5 years they have been residing over there in America, and they were having only trivial professions, means like cab drivers. They were not doing some extraordinary positional works, but they were just driving the cabs and the normal things they were doing. But however, they were enjoying their life in America. Suddenly, in the backdrop of the 9/11 happens, and they are changed into different identities, and the identities which they could not bear on the account of their Muslim nationality, Islamic nationality, Islamic ideology, and the Muslim ideology. They are taken as the perpetrators of the tragedy of 9/11. They are later on, they are imprisoned, they are arrested and sent into the jail under their suspected identity of the Muslim. The very opening novel of this Homeboy established that America has converted into a state which was more like a cell in prison in the post 9/11 times. Chuck, this is his not original name, but it was a pen name. Chuck searched for rewriting his Muslim identity and deconstructing impact of cultural trauma in post 9/11 are the major plot lines of this novel Homeboy. Actually, we have been discussing that cultural trauma was the evident product in the post 9/11 times. There was no reason that this incident should not be coded as a culturally traumatic, but what we are majorly concerned that there were two types of reaction towards the incident of 9/11. For example, on the happening of 9/11, there were repeatedly multifarious reactions. There was one section of the people who just demonstrated that the Muslims has done wrong to us and we should have to take the revenge of that. And similarly, there were the other Americans who took this stance that let the chance should be given of peace, means America could not live in the conflicts. American nation has some its social democratic values, means America was considered a promised land before the tragedy of 9/11 was considered as a promised land for the minorities and multicultural societies. But due to political reasons and political conflicts with the other world, America in the post 9/11 times was converted into a very restricted and prohibited land. Means the incident of 9/11 changed America from promised land into a prohibited land. So initially, in response to the tragedy of 9/11, initially the American fiction writers have been presenting that how the tragedy of 9/11 has impacted the social life of America. But later on, there were fiction writers like Amy Wildman's the novel Submission, and the other men as well. Gay Polisner is there. They have been contending and they have been consistently projected that there is the dire need to look beyond the humans, beyond the Americans' concept of humanity. So they have been trying to unburden cultural trauma. And similarly, what was the responsibility of the Muslim citizens? They basically have to rewrite their misrepresented identities. America was taking the Muslims as the terrorist. Any man who consider himself as a Muslim, America was taking him or her, means including the woman, as the terrorist. So what was the responsibility of the non-Western, non-American writers like like M.H. Naqvi? They helped the Americans to rewrite the negatively perceived identity of the Muslim. So in this rewriting project, in this project of unburdening cultural trauma, the Muslim fiction writers have also participated, and M.H. Naqvi is one of them. In this way, by rewriting their identity, by was some sort of help towards the Western discourse of America. So we believe on it that a rewriting project of misperceived identity is also to some extent the unburdening of cultural trauma. So multiple identities in the context of globalization was an inevitable phenomena. Same in American context, the people pre 9/11 times, the people were living with the multiple identities. By the story of the novel Homeboy, we see that Chuck with his friends Ali Chaudhry and Jameel and were living happily in the New York. Chuck and his friends are ordinary characters with ordinary professions. They are showing wandering with the American girlfriend in the pre 9/11 times, means they were from Pakistan, but they were having an American girlfriend and they were happily, means the very ordinary life. Though they were spending an ordinary life, but they were happy. Means they were not conscious of their identities, that she is American and we are the Muslims. This is basically a social scale where everyone enjoy the equal rights. But later on, as the incident of 9/11 happens, the tragedy, they have been labeled with a different identity. So the tragedy of 9/11, we usually say that tragedy is not more tragic, but the aftermaths of tragedy are more tragic. Means the happening of tragedy, falling of 2 or 4 aeroplanes and the towers, definitely was a matter of great tragedy, was a matter of great loss, but it was not so great loss as it has been, as the aftermaths of the tragedy has been. Only the phenomena of conversion of identities into the means from promising land into the suspected identities, as America has to face in the post 9/11 times, was the greatest loss, very equal to the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Means that in the aftermath of this tragedy, the whole America was converted into a land of multicultural conflicted identities. I am here to clarify that even in pre 9/11 times, America was multicultural. People with different identities were living there, but in post 9/11 times, it was converted into a multicultural conflicting lands. The people with the identities of conflicts. So we see that post 9/11 in its construction as a cultural trauma has raised serious concerns of divides from the Muslims and Americans. So definitely this is very the opening line of the novel The Homeboy. We have become Japs, Jews, Nigers. We were not before. Means prior to the incident of 9/11, they were having their different identities, but they were not so conscious of their identities. We fancied ourselves boulevards, recounters, Renaissance men, AC, Jimbo, and me. We were self-invented and self-made, and certain we had our fingers on the pulse of great global dialect. Means however, they were with their different previous identities, but At the same time, with the tragedy, they come into the pulse of global dialect. Means, as you know, it's very like similarly. If we talk in the term of economy, as we see that if the prices of dollars are hiked in the global market, then definitely our economy starts collapse in Pakistan. Similarly, as Americans were perceiving the Muslims as the negative, as America thought that the Muslims are terrorists. Similarly, even in the people who were with the Muslim identities uh, living in America, they also got scared, and they were part as the actor of the national global dialectic pulse. Naqvi points out the impact of the social hollowness which was created in America in the post 9/11 times. Naqvi established that living with the multiple conflicted identities turned into a human catastrophe in post 9/11 times. Uh, Means it was a more aftermath catastrophe. Naqvi also points out that the character of Chuck America in the pre 9/11 times was considered as a promised land for the immigrants and the minorities in its spirit of the American dream. But the sharp development of conflicts between the multiple identities turned America into an intolerant state for the Muslims and the minorities. So, for example, if we take the facts of the tragedy, that there were people of 93 countries different to those plane crashed, and there were not only the Americans, there were the people who were from 90 other countries. So this was not only the tragedy of only America, but it was the tragedy of 90 other countries as well. But America took this tragedy as on its her consciousness, and resultantly it presupposed all the Muslims as the perpetrators of the tragedy wherever they were, whether they even America converted a suspicious eye to those Muslims who were living in America since centuries, and even they were the residents of that city. So Chuck made some speeches. Definitely, it's M.H. Naqvi who is going to rewrite back the self-identity and history against the cultural trauma. According to A.C. Taliban, are transmogrified into the villains of modern civilization. But you know, this is the speech from AC. They are not much different from their fathers, brutes with the guns, except that this time they are on the wrong side of the history. Actually, here Naqvi provides the understanding that who were the Taliban. Taliban were basically the political actor of the tragedy. They have been on the side of America. They have been acting in these Talibans have been used politically against Soviet Union. So Taliban were not different. They have been glorified. They have been sponsored by America, and they were used against Russia in 1989. And later on, when those Taliban turned against to the America, they were the warriors. They were the trained warriors. But when they start this backlashing against the Americans, then they become terrorists. So AC he is here going to make speech that the Taliban are the same, and they have been used by America against Russia, and similarly those they have converted back to the America. The only difference of that terrorism is that first these terrorists have been used against Russia, and now these terrorists have themselves turned into America. The only difference is that they are on the wrong side of the history. Similarly, you can suspect what was the understanding of America as who can be a terrorist. So much suspected that even Muhammad Shah was another character in this novel, and FBI, they found him Muhammad Shah. How they charged on him the act of terrorism. The FBI found that Muhammad had no terrorist objectives. An investigation revealed he had assisted some friends who had overstayed their visas. Means even the people who have been overstaying with their visas in the America, they were considered as the terrorist, making him guilty of harboring illegal immigrants. Uh, but Later on he is released on this, but initially as he was having some overstay migrants, he was taken as a terrorist. So by this way, Naqvi is pretending to America that to whom you would charge as the terrorist. Terrorists are no other than the product of the America. So Muslims in general has misrepresentedly been labeled as terrorist, and so Taliban might be the terrorist, but Muslims are not the terrorist. Every Muslim cannot be charged with the label of terrorism. That's why how the Naqvi rewrites his self-identity and the Muslim's identity. Then there is the resentment and resistance in these novels. As you know that resentment and resistance is a natural phenomena. When someone misrepresents the other, definitely the misrepresented resists and rewrites his identity. The novel recalls Post calling America to respond in the swift fashion to kill the bastards and bomb cities and the countries, harboring them into basketball courts. Means America got so rash and irrational on the name of the war on terror that it wants to bomb everything. And interestingly, it has started bombing those who have not been the direct perpetrators of the tragedy. Direct perpetrator of the tragedy, for example, if it was Osama bin Laden, if these were the Talibans, then the Talibans have never been the direct victim were of those who have been on the planes. They gone with the planes, so America has started tracing out the perpetrators on the name of the virtual distance, that you are with us, are with them, and it has started attacking the whole nation instead of tracing very close search outs about Taliban, but it has started bombing the whole countries. Means only to search Osama bin Laden, it has started bombing in the whole Afghanistan. It has started bombing in the whole Iraq. Is it not unjustified? Even me and the MH Naqvi are not going are not of the view that it should not have to search out the terrorist. It should have to search about the terrorist, but not in the form of bombing the whole world. Whole countries on the account of the search of a single man. In his house, they listened to the President George Bush's speech challenging the world. This was the major stance where George Bush has developed, that either you are with us or you are with the terrorist. Means America has to start it in the very neo-orientalist perspective. You have been seeing that this is the analogy that us versus them. So America has started seeing the word in the single analogy, that whether you are with us or with the terrorist. If you are not with us, then you are a terrorist. AC considered this in the light of the biblical response of the eye for an eye, and to run counter to the ideals of enlightenment to which the West profess the adherence. He suggests that rationality demands of America thoughtful pursuit of its actions in the past to understand the conflict before it enters into the thoughtless war. Definitely, here Naqvi warns the America that it's even in the Bible, and even it's in the every very natural that an eye for the eye. If someone has done the act of terrorism against America, then only to go and choose that one. Otherwise, if you would be going to bombing the general public, then definitely they would convert against you, and you would have to face, or you would have to go through another bombing. So, and this is a very clear stances and message which M.H. Naqvi has presented in the novel. The novel goes into the history to make the point that America is predominantly responsible for violence in the world. Means violence generate violence, as usually you have heard that love begets love, and similarly I have been of the view that hate also begets hate, violence also begets violence. So this is the message that which M.H. Naqvi's novel has presented, that if you are going to create violence in the world, whether it might be America or someone else, then definitely you would have to face this violence in back as well. It created the Mujahideen in 1980s, and later the Taliban in Afghanistan in 1990s. The 21st century area of the world, it creates them, and once the Frankenstein turns against its creator, the empire uses deadlier force to vanquish it. It creates the stronger allies and the friends who became ruthless enemies later on. So, Taliban have never been, are not anything else rather than the product of America, which America has been using against Russia in 1989. In the next phase, governmental and political rhetoric tries to convince the public that these enemies around the world resent America for its lack of power. So, is it not interesting that once you have been using them as a political tool, and later on then you say that they are against America because they don't have power. So first, their lack of power, you have enjoyed their lack of power, you have enjoyed their brutality against your enemy, and when they converted against you, then you are saying that it's the lack of power, and that's the lack of civility, that is the lack of civic sense, that is the lack of modernity, that of peripheral of modernity. So all these Naqvi is basically going to challenge these stances of American history and in his fiction. As the American empire discriminates, exploits, alienates, frightens, kills, and invades other countries despite reservations and resistance, the protagonist and the homeboy is provoked and disillusioned. Chung transforms into a potentiality violent individual who would like to exact revenge on those who have wronged to America. Disillusioned and disappointed with America, he confesses to have welled with anger, though sure that his friends were not involved in any kind of terrorist activities against America. He would have enlisted in the cause if they were guilty as charged. So, the issues of identity and reacting against stereotypes. Basically, America was more probably moving on its Orientalist prejudices and stereotypes that all the Arabs are backward, that they are corrupt, primitive, their resistance to the change. These have been the Orientalist thoughts which American media has been pretending to portray in the post 9/11 times. So Naqvi here writes back that no one knows about the realities on the ground or on the loss of human lives, but everybody is busy in parceling myth and the prejudice with analysis and reportage. One such victim is in the homeboy was Ansar Mahmood. Interesting, that's the character of Ansar Mahmood is very interesting in this novel. A 24-year-old Pakistani. The innocent student, he was a student. The student asked a passerby to photograph him against the Hudson. Hudson is a bay. And on this account, a guard at a nearby post called the police because the shoot included a water treatment plant. Means in that picture there was a water treatment plant, means plant which treat the water, means clarify the water. So, as we see that in the spice, the big buildings are used as a by the spies. So he was arrested, investigated, tortured, and released after the FBI found him to be innocent. Ansar became a victim because he hailed from a perceived fundamentalist society that any man who can be a Muslim, he might be he might be a potential enemy of America, and he may be on the side of the terrorists. So I'm just taking a a picture of a water treatment plant. He is charged with the act of or the intention of terrorism. Is it not so interesting that America has developed such a very trivial type of stereotypes against the Muslims? According to Chuck, the West perceived all the Muslims as the terrorists after September 11, like stereotypes of black men as violent gang members and the Jews as the conspirators. In the West, Muslims are perceived to be the members of sleeper cells plotting against America. The West has lumped together all the Muslims under a single stereotype definition of Islam, which simplifies diverse and complex communities into a homogeneous entity. Consequently, violence of one strayed individual would be considered collective violence. These are the stereotypes which the investigator simultaneously imposed and questions when he explains to the Chuck, I am trying to understand why the Muslim terrorized. Does the Quran sanction terrorism? This was basically a security official who questions the Chuck. And for example, even on a very larger perspective, we say that Taliban did an act of terrorism against America, and they were the Muslim, no doubt. But every man except Taliban, and every man except that the perpetrator of tragedy, they are not the terrorists. So America took everyone as a terrorist. Chuck replies that he is a Muslim and that he has read the Quran, but he is not a terrorist. Similarly, Jimbo, the happy-go-lucky DJ, is a bad drunk, but he is not a terrorist. So here they define that even there are different types of the Muslims. There are some good Muslims, and there are the people who even do such activities which are prohibited in their religion. But it never means, for example, if a person take wine, he might not be a terrorist. He might be a bad Muslim, but he might not be a terrorist. Naqvi tries to question the misplaced basis of these stereotypes to clarify the confusion regarding the representation of the Muslims in the West. Chuck and his friends go to the bars and to drink. Jimbo is in love with the duck, who is an American and Christian. If stereotypically believed that Islam enjoins the killing of the infidels, Naqvi argues, how can a Muslim enter into the marriage with a Christian or a non-Muslim? Even Jimbo's father, who happens to be a conservative Pathan from the northern areas of Pakistan, is happy with their union. Naqvi tries to represent a progressive identity against a regressive identity of the Muslims in the West, that even Muslims believe on the progressive identities, rather America believes on the regressive identity of the people. So reviewing Muslim cultural values and collective consciousness, that has been taken as Chuck, despite knowing the hijab definitely as a matter of reaction and resistance, Muslim also develops a sense of collective consciousness on this, and so in this way we see the two collective consciousness. One is the American collective consciousness, and other is the Muslim collective consciousness. So even on the larger scale, in the post 9/11 times, the America and Muslims, even the Muslims who are living in the America, they were against the one another, means the Americans and the Muslims. So even Americans, this stereotype of against the Muslims converted the people or the citizens of the America who were living at the land of America into two binaries. One is the Americans and the other are the Muslims. Though the Americans living in the America were also the equal citizens of the America as well. But later on, Chuck becomes adhesive to the cultural symbols of his religion. This is basically strategy of resistance. He strongly favors that the Muslims should practice their identity through cultural symbols as contours of the religious identity and the self. Then there are some incidents of social scrutinization of the Muslims. We see that Chuck was shocked that how AC was dismissed from his job for 15 years on the account of the following false charges of terrorism. For example, these were interestingly the charges against AC, that the possession of the Arabic literature from AC turned for him as a manual of bomb making. Means the Arabic literature was taking it as a manual of bomb making. The possession of Muqaddimah Ibn Khaldun proved as an anarchist book. So as they were not knowing, and they considered that even the great Muslim scholars who have been, Ibn Khaldun have been living some 5 centuries before, but he was taken as the anarchist book, as it was not in line with the interest of the America. Once Chuck is encountered with an American girl who questioned the meaning of his name. She taunts him on the account of his absurd name. She says, "What's your name?" He says, "My name is Chuck." Chuck, he says that it is an American name. She chuckled. "What kind of name is Chuck?" "Well, I suppose it's an American." He just in response he said that this is my American name. So she says that well, I suppose it's American. Are you American? No, I'm Pakistani. So she says that, why do you have an American name when you are a Pakistani? Though it might be interesting, but it points that even Americans, they were not tolerant. They are not willing any other name any other way one to take the American names and the values, as he might not be the in group of that culture. So by moving towards the conclusion, we see that the novel Homeboy established that before the incident of 9/11, the American society in religious and political terms was hostile to the Muslims on the account of its Orientalist binaries. The identity of the Muslim was constructed as a berated, the second one marginalized, and the negative one, the Muslims in the America, even before the incident of 9/11, were taken as an invisible enemy of America. But after the incident of 9/11, the Western media consciously developed a discourse of terrorism against the Muslims to justify its national and political stigmas. Thus, the situation of social exclusion aggravated against the Muslims. The Muslims had to face social discrimination and scrutinization. The phenomenon of multiculturalism made it complex for the America to differentiate between the identities of the innocent victim of the incident of the 9/11 and the perpetrators of this tragedy. The post 9/11 were divided the whole Americans into us versus them, means us versus the terrorist model of social discrimination, and raised the situation of collective consciousness. In response to the raised consciousness, the Muslim felt it necessary to write back as a strategy of redefining their distorted identity, and this is more a project of unburdening cultural trauma by rewriting their misrepresented and misperceived identities. So we consider it that MH Naqvi to a greater extent has remained successful in rewriting and unburdening the cultural trauma constructed in the backdrop of the 9/11. Thank you very much.